Tonight, former Republican gubernatorial nominee Rob Astorino speaking to RFL about his run for Governor Cuomo's job. The Westchester County exec also gives us some insight into his future political plans. And President Obama back in D.C., where a political battle brewing with Republicans on the Hill. The president and the GOP get ready to face off and get down to business. The president once again states his plan to utilize executive power if necessary to ram through key laws like immigration reform. Plus, tonight, Missouri Governor Jay Nixon is not taking any chances. Nixon has called in the National Guard for backup as the city and the state awaits the grand jury's decision in the Michael Brown death case. Tonight, two attorneys joining our panel to take a look at the case from a legal perspective. And good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thanks so much for joining us. And tonight we're going to start in New York, where Governor Andrew Cuomo is embarking on another term after a gritty gubernatorial election. When it was all said and done, Cuomo had a 13-point win over his Republican challenger, Westchester County Executive Rob Astorino. And I'd like to now welcome tonight's first guest. Mr. Astorino is kind enough to join us on set. Thank you very much.
Good to be with you, Richard.
Well, I'm curious, when you take it all in, we said from the beginning you face disadvantages with name recognition, party registration in the state, certainly funding. How do you look at it? And I know you're a sports fan. Would you have said you ever believed in moral victories before? But when you crack the 40%, is that enough of a moral victory? Or do you say, oh, we spent a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of money. If you don't win, you don't win. How do you view it when it's all said and done?
Well, ultimately, if you don't win, you failed. But I think there's a lot of victories along the way. And we looked at the congressional. We picked up 3 congressional seats in areas that we did very well in. The state Senate is now Republican in areas that we did very well in. I think, when you're outspent 10-1, it's a very difficult thing to win or overcome. But we were outspent 10-1 in a 2-1 Democratic state, and the governor got 1 million less votes than he did last time. 54% for a governor who was supposed to be very, very popular is nothing that I think he's proud of. I mean, I think he would have liked to have had 65%. So the fact that we kept it to 13 points, 54-41, being outspent 10-1, not having a lot of time to really get a statewide campaign in order, I'm proud of what we did, what we accomplished. I'm really proud of the issues that we brought up. Those issues aren't going away.
When you look at the map of New York, and we'll talk in a minute about maybe 4 years from now, outside of New York City, I know that's a big but outside of the 5 boroughs, you actually won overall, right?
Yeah, we won 49-46 outside the 5 boroughs. So, there's a little bit of a victory. We'll take that. It's I think, an accomplishment in a state that is very democratic. But you look at the map from 2010 and 2014, the county map. You look at that; it's pretty interesting. It was a very blue county map, very blue state from 2010, where the governor did very, very well. I think he won about 40 counties. In 2010, and then in 2014, we won 46 counties. So it was a very red state, but I'm winning Pound Ridges and he's winning New York City.
Yeah, well, you carried certain counties that I think some people were surprised at. At the end, were you disappointed you didn't get Westchester when it was said and done?
Westchester is always going to be a very tough county for a Republican. In the county executive races, I've won them twice and I've won them convincing. We said from the very beginning, a gubernatorial or a presidential voter is very different than a local race. And we did much better than people thought we would do in Westchester. We certainly didn't get blown out. Would I have liked to have won Westchester? Yeah, but in the whole grand scheme of things, Westchester is a very Democratic county, and so Cuomo won Westchester.
You obviously faced the disadvantage we talked about, but I think it's also fair to say you also didn't get a lot of help necessarily from some within your own party. For those who forgot, this was Governor Christie, who was actually campaigning for another Republican governor, a gubernatorial hopeful in Connecticut. This is back in July. Take a listen to what he said when asked about why he wasn't campaigning for my guest.
We don't pay for landslides, and we don't invest in lost causes. If the New York race becomes competitive, I'll consider campaigning in the New York race. But right now, by the public polls, there's a lot more competitive races like this one in Connecticut where I got to spend my time.
How much did it hurt when you got the head of the National Republican Governors Association in July, in the middle of the summer, when you're trying to introduce yourself to New Yorkers, to go across the border and call your campaign a lost cause. I mean, you're reaching out to donors at this point. You're trying to convince, swing voters that you're the guy, and you got the guy who's the face of the RGA saying what he said. Not
helpful. Not helpful at all. And I told him so. That was July 21st. July 23rd, we were in Aspen together for the Republican Governors Association. That was the same day that the New York Times broke the Moreland scandal. Yep. And he had every opportunity to do an about face and say, you know what? Some extraordinary circumstances just happened in New York where the governor is now under investigation by the U.S. attorney. We got to look at this race in a different way. That's all he had to say.
They didn't need to go where he went there
and
either.
That would have changed the dynamics dramatically. So it was not helpful when he said it. We did have a conversation in Colorado. That was the last time we spoke, quite frankly. But I am not going to look so much at what Chris Christie didn't do. I'm going to look at what the other governors did do for me.
You know Michael Lahr, who used to be the former state Republican party executive. And as it relates to state Republicans, he said this. I'm curious your take. He said, Dean Skelos clearly was working against Rob's campaign. Dean Skelos, the Senate Majority Leader. He and the governor cut a deal. A deal was cut for Mangano to endorse Cuomo in exchange for Cuomo staying out of the Senate races on Long Island. We had heard behind the scenes some of the same stuff. What do you make of it? Do you agree with what Lola said?
Well, we were told that. I have not talked to Dean since the election to talk to him about that. I'm going to sit down with Leader Skelos and work now through all this, but also move ahead. I mean, the election is over. There's governing that needs to be done. There's new state senators that came in that are Republicans. The Republican Party has to stand for something. The Senate has to stand for something. It can't be Democrat light. It can't be just go along to get along. They need to stand for something. And I've said that very publicly. And now they have a chance to stand for something, but they've got to put out an agenda for what they'd like to accomplish over these 2 years. And so I do plan on meeting with Dean Skelos on moving the party ahead, because we do need a competitive two-party system in New York that benefits everybody.
Well, on election night, we were there at your headquarters, and you said to the following, not just the people in the room, but the people watching at home. Take a listen.
Someone once told me you can't lose when you tell the truth. And tonight, I know that's true. For we have not tilted at windmills in this campaign. We have planted a flag, and we will be back to reclaim it and advance it further.
A reasonable person would say right there that you're somebody who's keeping your options open, or maybe even making it clear that you go down this journey again. After what you went through, are you even more convinced you'd want to run again in 4 years? Or do you say, you know, this is an uphill battle for any Republican in this state here.
True.
I don't know. I don't know that I really need this in my life to go up against this. And sometimes some of even the internal factors that you're dealing with in your own party. Where's your head at? You got time, but still.
Yeah, I think you're right. I have time. And what I do is I go back to what I'm doing. I've been doing it all along during the campaign. We just put out a budget that, again, no tax increase. The budget was done early. We're spending less than when I walked in the door 5 years ago. So we've got more to do in the next 3 years as county executive. And what I meant by that is whoever runs for governor in 4 years as a Republican needs to advance the cause, that it's worth fighting. These issues are not going away, as I said earlier. They're important. How many New Yorkers? I just came home from Florida after the election. My family and I went down to Florida for 5-6 days. And I can't tell you how many New Yorkers I met, bumped into, that some were on vacation, but many had already moved away, moved out of New York. And I talked about that in the campaign. They would have loved to have stayed in New York, but they couldn't afford it. So I have no clue what's going to happen in 4 years. You know, whether I'll run for a third term as county executive, would get out of politics and go to the private sector, I don't know. But I do know that whoever runs for governor needs to, and in the 4 years in between, needs to advance the cause that this state has to get better.
You mentioned before your budget time here.
Yeah.
There's going to be a fight here about pensions. Now, pension obligations are huge problems,
yes.
Not just in this county, in this state here, in this country. We've seen it play out, obviously, in living color in many places. But to keep the pension obligations the way we're borrowing against our own pension fund to pay our pension obligations. Any small business or business out there couldn't go to the bank and say, give me money to make my payroll. It wouldn't work that way. This is just passing the buck down the line. If you didn't do that, property taxes would go up, spending would go up. Are we looking at a false impression here that we're keeping spending down and property tax down by just passing a liability down that somebody's going to have to pay for?
Well, our pension costs in 2 years, from 11 to 13, went from $69 million to $101 million. That's crazy, crazy. The state brought this program in where you could borrow, and the state is the biggest, I don't want to say abuser of it, but the state is the biggest user of it. And just about everyone has to, because the options are either massive layoffs or massive service cuts or massive tax increases, all of which are bad options. So this one that we went into and many others is for a short period of time where it bridges to now the point where we can start reducing our costs. And sometimes you have to do those. So we are efficiently running a government the way you're supposed to.
I get that, but if it was 6 years ago, you walked in and somebody told you about,
oh, I think
well,
it's
this
crazy.
is how you'd be like, what are you, crazy?
I think you're right. I think it's, and only in government do they do that. You're absolutely right. But that brings the other problem is we're paying for garbage that was picked up 25 years ago. And you know, so we've got to deal with these pensions in a real way, and the will isn't there.
Well, I certainly appreciate you taking a few minutes before you get back to it. Thank you so much. All right, everybody, when we come back, we'll bring out our panel. We'll talk about not only this, but other issues facing not just New York, but the region. Please stay with us.